To be honest, Linda, I don't feel comfortable with him sitting up front. That small whisper cut through the quiet of the first-class cabin like a knife. It wasn't shouted, just a few words spoken with the easy confidence of Gregory Stanton, a longtime passenger of the airline, yet heavy enough to shatter the peace in an instant. The man he referred to wasn't a stranger, not a lost economy passenger, but Alexander Cross, dressed in a $2,000 suit, seated quietly in 1A, the most prestigious spot on the Gulfstream G650 preparing for takeoff. Alexander didn't respond. His eyes stayed on the tablet screen, his fingers gliding as if he hadn't heard a thing. But inside, a cold switch flipped, the same switch he had carried all his life. Memories of being doubted, of quiet words laced with cruelty, of looks that told him he didn't belong. At 30,000 feet, he was not just a passenger. He was the CEO of Nexora Analytics, the tech giant shaping the future of artificial intelligence. At 44, Alexander had become a billionaire twice, once by talent, once by resilience. Yet in that moment, all of it was reduced to just him being that man. Chief Flight Attendant Linda Parker, 40-6, hesitated. The professional smile on her lips cracked for a fraction of a second. She knew Stanton well, a loyal flyer, generous, accustomed to special treatment. And she also knew Cross, a wealthy passenger, but newer, less established. A quick calculation of power flashed in her mind, only a few seconds, but enough to decide the fate of one man on this flight. She walked toward Alexander, her smile warm but overdone. "Mr. Cross, I'm very sorry. We have another distinguished passenger, Mr. Stanton. He gets a bit anxious when flying and usually only feels comfortable in seat 1A. I hope you can understand." Alexander lifted his head, his gaze calm. "I paid for this seat. I need the privacy to work. I will stay here." The gentle but firm refusal thickened the air. Linda swallowed hard, her smile stiffening. Behind her, Gregory Stanton pretended to read his magazine, the corner of his mouth curled with disdain. In the cockpit, Captain Robert Miller, 50-7, had already been summoned by Linda. He stepped into the aisle, his voice low but commanding. "Mr. Cross, please cooperate. Seat 4A is still first class, but to ensure an on-time departure, I suggest you move." Alexander didn't look up, his voice deep, steady as steel. "This is my seat, and no, I will not move." The moment coiled tight like a spring. Stanton added fuel. "Come on, buddy, don't make this hard. I always sit here. Just switch, it's not a big deal." The word buddy dropped like gasoline on an open flame. Alexander drew a deep breath, holding his composure. He knew a single frown would be enough for them to label him the angry black man. He would not give them that weapon. "My name is Mr. Cross." His voice lowered, resonant like a bell of iron across the cabin. "And I will not move." The silence that followed was heavy and raw. Linda frowned, delivering her final warning. "If you refuse, we will have no choice but to ask you to leave this flight." Stanton's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Linda's smile turned calculated, and Captain Miller's stern tone carried the weight of convenience disguised as authority. Alexander knew he had been cornered. If he resisted, he would be dragged off the plane and splashed across headlines as a troublemaker. He inhaled deeply, folded his tablet, and slowly rose to his feet. Passing Stanton, he didn't look at him. He didn't need to, because in that moment, as he settled into seat 4A further back, Alexander Cross was no longer just a passenger humiliated. He was a man quietly loading his weapon. And those who smirked just now had no idea that within hours their entire world would collapse at the hands of that man, the one they believed did not belong in seat number 1. The cabin felt as dense as smoke, but inside Alexander Cross's mind, memories surged, fragments of the past playing like film in reverse, reminding him why he was on this flight. At just 44, he was already a symbol of the technological age. Nexora Analytics, the company he had founded, had revolutionized the world with predictive data technology. Governments, financial giants, even airlines themselves used Nexora's algorithms to forecast trends and make decisions. Alexander was not only a CEO, he was the man writing the script for the future. Yet, seated in 4A, ignored and dismissed, he was reduced to nothing more than a black man in a suit. He remembered that morning in New Jersey. Prestige Air Terminal carried the scent of fine leather and Arabica coffee, a place where power walked across polished wooden floors. He moved through it with quiet composure, his navy suit fitting his strong frame. No need for showmanship, no entourage, only a slim leather bag holding his laptop and a change of clothes. He was greeted with the flawless smile of Amelia, the young concierge. "Seat 1A, as you requested, Mr. Cross." Just a small confirmation, but to Alexander it was a reminder that seat was his, not something to beg for, but a position to affirm his presence. In 20 years of his career, Alexander had learned to wear silence as armor. Born in a poor working-class neighborhood in Baltimore, he grew up with worn-out shoes and meals heavy on fries rather than meat. His mother, a night shift nurse, had instilled in him a lesson he carried forever. People may see you as small, but you must never believe it yourself. At 19, he earned a scholarship to MIT. In the stark, white labs, he was an outsider, often regarded as no more than a support technician. But when his mathematical model predicting oil markets won an international prize, the entire tech world was forced to look up. That was the beginning of Nexora. The cost, of course, was a long trail of humiliations. In boardrooms of investment funds, eyes still regarded him as if success had come only by luck. On golf courses, questions about membership permits echoed again and again. And even today, on the private jet he had paid to charter, suspicion clung to him like a shadow. What they didn't know was that this flight was not simply taking him to Zurich to sign a robotics deal. It was a turning point, a multi-billion-dollar contract that would secure Nexora's dominance in Europe. Alexander needed absolute focus, which was why he had chosen seat 1A. And yet that seat had been stripped from him by nothing more than a whisper. In the row ahead, Gregory Stanton raised his champagne glass, his eyes gleaming with triumph. He was the embodiment of a class that believed power was synonymous with skin color and inherited reputation. Linda Parker, the chief attendant, believed that prioritizing frequent flyers was simply her professional duty. And Captain Robert Miller thought the convenience of the flight outweighed justice. They assumed Alexander Cross would swallow his humiliation and let it end there. But what they did not realize was that this very moment was the spark. Sitting in seat 4A, Alexander reopened his tablet. The blue glow lit his composed face. His fingers moved swiftly, not to draft a complaint, not to send a plea, but to type a single line to CFO Daniel Wu. Daniel, the Prestige Air deal. Move the contract over. I will sign immediately. One message, one signature, and the fate of the entire airline, along with everyone who had just demeaned him, was about to turn upside down. Alexander leaned back, his eyes calm. Outwardly, he appeared as a defeated passenger, pushed backward. But in the silence, a storm was forming, and soon it would sweep everything away. The engines roared as the Gulfstream G650 lifted from the runway, climbing into the silver-gray sky. Inside the cabin, 3 people believed they had won. Gregory Stanton leaned back in the seat 1A, raising his champagne with smug satisfaction. Linda Parker calmly made her service notes, convinced she had handled a delicate situation with finesse. And Captain Robert Miller in the cockpit drew a deep breath, thinking he had extinguished a fuse before it could ignite. Only one man did not share in that sense of triumph: Alexander Cross. Seated in 4A, he was still as stone, but inside his blood boiled with a cold, precise plan. The glow of his tablet lit his face. A message from CFO Daniel Wu appeared almost instantly. The contract is ready, but I thought you planned to sign after Zurich. Alexander's lips curved in the faintest smile, not of defeat, but of a hunter setting his trap. His fingers tapped out the reply. Circumstances changed. Send me the signing copy now. Absolute priority. Minutes later, a secure link flashed on the screen. Alexander opened it. Pages of clauses scrolled by, hundreds of them. But he knew every word by heart. This was the deal Nexora Analytics had been preparing for half a year in silence. The full acquisition of Prestige Air Charter. The very company operating the jet he was sitting on. When he signed in the digital box, it wasn't only his mark on a contract worth hundreds of millions, it was the end for those who had just mocked him. A soft chime sounded. Daniel confirmed. Done. Funds have been transferred from the trust. As of now, Prestige Air Charter is officially owned by Nexora Holdings. Alexander leaned back and drew a deep breath. He was no longer a humiliated passenger. He was the new owner of this aircraft, the supreme superior of every single person who had forced him from seat 1A. He told no one. He didn't need to. Real power does not scream. It resides in silence, in a single cold signature powerful enough to alter the fate of hundreds. At the front of the cabin, Stanton drained his glass while Linda leaned to refill it. They laughed loudly, their voices tinged with alcohol and disdain. To them, Alexander was nothing but the obedient black man who had backed down. But Alexander was drafting an invisible indictment. He noted each detail with precision. Linda Parker, chief flight attendant, lied about Stanton's flight anxiety, choosing loyalty to a regular over justice. Captain Robert Miller abused his authority, called him son, threatened to eject him from the plane to placate prejudice. First Officer Kevin Doyle stood by in silence, choosing his own comfort over truth. Gregory Stanton, the instigator, the smug face of a rotten system. Each name was another entry in the equation, and Alexander, the master of data, knew it was time to turn data into action. He typed another message to Daniel Wu. Gather complete personnel files of the PAC 471 crew. Attendance, captain, first officer. I want everything. Daniel responded immediately. Understood. You'll have them within 60 minutes. Alexander closed the tablet, his eyes half shut. To Stanton, he looked like a man brooding in defeat. But in truth, with every passing minute, the net tightened around those who had laughed at him. Outside, the jet sliced through the clouds, leaving behind a thin white trail. Inside, 3 people believed they were on top of the world, but they did not know the aircraft had become a courtroom suspended in the sky. And when its wheels touched down in Zurich, the sentence would be delivered. Alexander opened his eyes and fixed his gaze forward. He whispered, just for himself, "The game begins." The Gulfstream G650 cruised steadily at 41,000 feet. The cabin was bathed in soft light, where the quiet clink of champagne poured into crystal glasses echoed faintly. Gregory Stanton laughed boisterously from the front row, occasionally glancing back at seat 4A with a mocking grin. Linda Parker topped off his glass, her tension hidden behind the polished mask of a professional smile. And Alexander Cross. He paid no attention to the laughter. In his hands, a digital file had just appeared on the tablet screen. A message from Daniel Wu arrived exactly as promised. Crew files for PAC 471. Full details. Alexander opened the file. Each page slid across his eyes like cords revealing fate. He read not as a passenger, but with the cold calculation of a CEO accustomed to analyzing data, hunting flaws, categorizing, projecting consequences. Linda Parker, 40, 6 years old, chief flight attendant, 20 years in the industry. Her file praised by male frequent flyers, often favored for catering to high-profile passengers. No official violations, but internal notes marked her habit of flexible rule interpretation. Alexander nodded slightly. That very flexibility had allowed her to lie in order to please Stanton, putting prejudice above fairness. Captain Robert Miller, 57, captain, 30 years of experience, former Air Force pilot. A few complaints noted, impatient with difficult passengers. Never disciplined, yet his words to Alexander echoed sharply. "Son, it's a small matter. Don't make trouble." Son. One short word, heavy as chains, revealing the arrogance of a man accustomed to power, as untouchable. First Officer Kevin Doyle, 35, Keo, pilot. A flawless record, top of his flight school, marked as future captain material within 5 years. But flawless did not mean courageous. Kevin had stood there, witnessed it all, and stayed silent like a shadow. Alexander recorded, "Guilty of silent complicity." He sat upright, the blue glow of the screen reflecting across his composed face. Every line was not just information. It was evidence, a scalpel cutting open a disease. He no longer saw them as individuals, but as variables in a system awaiting purification. At the front of the cabin, Stanton waved his hands while boasting of investments, unaware that his name too was inscribed on the list. Alexander had written a simple note. Gregory Stanton, 50 date, chairman of Stanton Holdings. Traits: arrogant, discriminatory, dangerous to anyone he deems different. Action: the instigator. Consequence: his financial empire will collapse entirely. Alexander typed another message to Daniel Wu. Assemble legal. I want a full review of Prestige Air's company culture. Begin with this flight. 0 tolerance. Outside the window, clouds swirled like rolling silver waves. Within Alexander, a storm rose as well, but one forged of steel resolve. He recalled his mother's words. You don't need to shout for people to hear. You only need to be strong enough that they dare not ignore you. At that moment, Linda Parker passed his seat, her smile perfectly composed. Mr. Cross, would you care for anything else? Perhaps a glass of red wine? Alexander lifted his eyes, letting them linger on her face longer than necessary. He did not answer immediately. His gaze was cold as glass, and it made Linda shiver. No, he said evenly, his voice deep. Linda nodded and walked away. She did not realize that in the moment his eyes met hers, her fate had already been sealed. Alexander closed the tablet. In his mind, the fragments aligned into a picture, a plan not merely for vengeance, but to expose and dismantle an entire corrupted system. They thought he was just a passenger forced from seat 1A. But they had no idea that on this very flight he had already taken the true seat of power, the seat of ownership. Stanton's laughter still echoed at the front. Alexander closed his eyes. He did not need to speak. The wheels of fate were already turning, and when this aircraft touched down in Zurich, it would not be just a landing. It would be a tribunal delivering judgment on them all. The landing gear screeched against the Zurich runway, the sound echoing through the cabin. Most passengers feel relief when a plane touches down safely, but on this Gulfstream G650, only 3 felt triumphant. Gregory Stanton took one last sip of champagne. Linda Parker neatly stacked her service trays, and Captain Robert Miller, in the cockpit, drew a deep, self-satisfied breath. They believed everything had passed smoothly. They believed the small issue had been brushed aside. They believed their old habits and their authority had prevailed. Only Alexander Cross, seated silently in 4A, knew the real game was just beginning. He unbuckled his belt without rushing to leave. Every movement was deliberate, as if time itself had slowed. Stanton rose first, straightening his collar with an unashamedly arrogant grin. Excellent service as always, Linda. You know I always trust Prestige Air, he declared loudly, making sure Alexander could hear. Linda nodded, her eyes flicking briefly toward Alexander, before turning away as if he didn't exist. Alexander stood, lifted his small leather bag. But instead of heading to the exit, he walked straight toward the cockpit. Linda startled, hurrying to block him. Mr. Cross, the exit is this way, she said, her polite tone edged with firmness. He stopped, his gaze fixed on her. His voice was deep, not loud, but commanding. I need to speak with the captain, the first officer, and you. Linda faltered, her confidence cracking. Sir, the cockpit is restricted. Passengers are not. Not a passenger, Alexander interrupted. 3 words fell like stone. He stepped forward, no explanation needed. The cockpit door opened. Captain Miller and First Officer Kevin Doyle turned, frowning in irritation. "Mr. Cross, this is not the place for—" Miller began, but Alexander raised a hand, silencing him. "Sit down," he ordered, his tone calm and absolute. "Both of you, and Linda, inside. Close the door." No one moved immediately. Habitual authority urged Miller to resist, but Alexander's eyes, cold, sharp, and unyielding, froze him in place. At last they obeyed, like students summoned to the headmaster's office. The cockpit door shut, the lock clicking shut with a hard snap. The cramped space grew stifling. Linda stood pressed against the side chair, her hands clenched. Kevin Doyle kept his head down, sweat forming on his brow. Robert Miller folded his arms, struggling to hold on to his authority, though his heartbeat pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. Alexander studied each of them in silence. Then he exhaled, his voice low but clear. 3 hours ago, you thought you had won. You thought you could push a passenger you didn't like to the back row. But there is something you never knew. He paused, drew out his tablet, and held it up. On the screen glowed the Nexora Holdings logo. Beneath it, the words, "Acquisition completed, Prestige Air Charter." As of 9 this morning, New York time, Prestige Air Charter officially belongs to Nexora. And Nexora belongs to me. Silence fell, so heavy it could be cut with a knife. Linda's mouth dropped open, her face drained of color. Kevin's head snapped up, eyes wide with disbelief. Miller stammered, No, that's impossible." Alexander stepped closer, his voice dropping lower, sharp as steel. "Possible, and already done. You are sitting in the cockpit of an aircraft I own. You are speaking to the CEO of the company that just dismissed your leadership, and I am the one who decides your fate, right here." Linda trembled, her eyes brimming with tears. Kevin swallowed hard, his throat tightening. Robert Miller, a man long accustomed to absolute command, felt for the first time in his life as small as a child. Alexander stopped, letting silence stretch, heavy as an unspoken verdict. Fear rose within them layer by layer. At last, he spoke, each word distinct. "You thought I was just a passenger. But from this moment on, I am the owner. And the truth has landed with us." The cramped cockpit suddenly felt as cold as a prison cell. The engines were winding down, but the hearts of the 3 people before Alexander Cross pounded chaotically. They looked at one another, not daring even to breathe too loudly. Alexander stood tall, without needing a chair, without needing to raise his voice. Power radiated from every look, every breath. He let silence press down on them before he began. His eyes fell on Linda Parker first. The 46-year-old woman had long been the queen of the first-class cabin, fluent in fake smiles and timely bows. But now her lips trembled, her lipstick faded under stress. "Linda Parker," Alexander said, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "You chose a side. You invented a cheap story about flight anxiety to mask Stanton's prejudice. You turned service into a tool of bias. You thought yourself clever. In truth, you signed your own death sentence." Linda drew in a sharp breath, her eyes welling. I was only doing my job," Alexander cut her off, his words striking straight into her mind. "Your job was to protect passengers, but you chose to protect prejudice. As of this moment, You are terminated from Nexora Aviation. You will never set foot on this aircraft again as crew. Tomorrow, you will sit in economy on your way back to America. That will be your last flight." Linda broke into sobs, the sound stifled in the tight cabin. She wanted to kneel, but her knees shook too violently to allow it. Alexander turned to Kevin Doyle, the young first officer. The 35-year-old man who had dreamed of becoming captain now sat pale, his hands knotted, sweat glistening across his forehead. "Kevin Doyle," Alexander called him by name. "You stood there, watched everything, and chose silence. I do not fault youth. I fault cowardice. You believed silence would keep you safe. But today, you will understand, silence in the face of injustice is also a crime." Kevin opened his mouth, but only broken words stumbled out. I didn't know what to do." "You will have time to think about that," Alexander replied, his eyes never leaving him. "Your record will be sent to all partner airlines, and in my report, the name Kevin Doyle will be tied forever to one word: complicity. Your dream of becoming captain ends here." Kevin dropped his head, his fingers digging into his palms until his nails broke skin. In that instant, he felt his youth, his ambitions, his future shatter like glass at his feet. At last, Alexander turned to Robert Miller. The veteran captain, once used to unquestioned obedience, now stared back with confusion in his eyes, his face tense, his breath heavy. "Robert Miller," Alexander said, his voice deeper, heavier. 30 years of experience, thousands of flights, and today you used your authority not to ensure safety, but to indulge the prejudice of one man. You called humiliation trivial. You called me son. You stripped me of dignity to protect the comfort of an arrogant passenger." Miller swallowed hard, his voice quivering. "Mr. Cross, I only wanted to keep the flight on schedule, to avoid trouble." Alexander stepped closer, leaning down, his voice like thunder rolling through the cabin. "No. You wanted to keep things easy for yourself. You forgot the first principle of a pilot. Every passenger is a life entrusted to you. You did not only humiliate me, you turned the skies into a place of injustice. And for that, your career ends here." Miller collapsed into the pilot's seat, his face drained of all color. His hands gripped the controls as if clinging to the last shred of power. But it was already gone. Alexander straightened, his gaze sweeping across the three. His words came slowly, sharp as a verdict. "You are all terminated, effective immediately. Nexora's security team is waiting at Zurich to escort you out. Do not attempt to contact anyone within the company. From this moment, you are nothing but the past." No one answered. Only trembling nods and the shallow, rapid breaths of 3 people who had just lost everything. Alexander opened the cockpit door and stepped out. Along the way, he spoke to the young flight attendant who had stayed silent throughout the flight, her eyes wide with fear as she watched it all unfold. "Stay. A new crew will arrive within 2 hours. Work with them. This is your chance." Then he slung his leather bag over his shoulder and strode down the stairs into the icy Zurich morning. He did not look back. Behind him, an old world had collapsed. Ahead, a new era had already begun. News did not need the press to spread. It found its way on its own, like fire racing through dry grass. Less than an hour after Alexander Cross stepped off the plane in Zurich, whispers were already running through the private aviation world. The Prestige air crew was fired right on the aircraft. At first, it was murmurs. A flight attendant from another company called her friend. "Did you hear? Linda Parker was dismissed, right on the runway." A veteran captain read an email from headquarters, his heart racing. "Robert Miller lost his flight status." Impossible, but the rumors grew sharper, undeniable. Proof came not from gossip, but from an official announcement posted by Nexora Holdings across the internal network. As of 9:00 a.m. New York time, Nexora has officially acquired Prestige Air Charter. The new leadership has enacted a zero-tolerance policy. No discrimination and no breach of professional ethics will be tolerated. Personnel changes take effect immediately. Sempound. The private aviation industry shook. People were not only talking about the lightning-fast takeover, but also about an unprecedented act. A black billionaire flipping the board and dismissing an entire flight crew just minutes after signing the acquisition. In a cold Zurich airport hotel room, 3 people sat like statues. Linda, Robert, and Kevin. Their phones rang incessantly, but every call failed. Employee IDs revoked, emails locked, company credit cards cancelled. They had been erased from the system in a single morning. Linda dialed an old colleague. "Can you help me find another job?" Silence hung for a few seconds before the answer came short and blunt. "I'm sorry, Linda. Your story. Everyone knows it now. No airline will take you." Her voice broke. 20 years of career gone in a flash, all for one mistake, choosing to stand with prejudice. Robert Miller, the veteran captain, called a contact at the aviation authority. The reply was colder still. "Robert, your record is under investigation for abuse of authority and breach of flight safety ethics. I advise you to hire a lawyer." He hung up, his hand trembling. 30 years of reputation shattered by a single careless word. "Son." Kevin Doyle sat in silence. His wife called on video, tears streaking her face. "Kevin, what's happening? They're saying you're grounded." He bit his lip, unable to form words. In his mind, only one sentence repeated. "I did nothing." But it was precisely that silence which ended his future. Meanwhile, in a luxurious Zurich bar, Gregory Stanton raised his glass of whiskey, still oblivious to the storm circling him. He believed he had won a small victory, pushing an undeserving man from seat 1A. Stanton did not yet understand that he had placed his hand on the blade of a knife. Then the news broke wide. At 9:00 a.m. New York time, headlines erupted. Nexora Holdings completes acquisition of Prestige Air Charter. Alexander Cross enforces zero-tolerance policy on discrimination. Wall Street buzzed. Investors marveled. A deal so fast, so decisive. But across airline corridors, fear seeped into the walls. If a billionaire can dismiss a captain on the spot, are any of us safe? On social media, the story spread like a storm. A passenger's secret recording of Linda ordering Alexander to leave seat 1A surfaced. The image of the black man quietly standing, lifting his bag, moving back, carried the caption, "They had no idea he was the new owner." Within hours, the video reached millions of views. Alexander Cross did not read the comments. He sat in a temporary Zurich office, preparing for his meeting with the robotics company. Yet in a quiet moment he understood. His decision had gone far beyond personal retribution. This was a declaration. No one could ignore it anymore. No one could pretend prejudice was a small matter. From this day forward, the industry would remember a morning in Zurich, the morning a man stepped off a plane as a passenger, but walked away as the judge of the skies. Afternoon sunlight spilled through the clear glass of the 5-star Zurich hotel where Gregory Stanton was staying. He reclined in his chair, whiskey swirling in his hand. On the table lay his phone, tuned to the financial news. A headline scrolled across the screen, making him frown. Nexora Holdings completes acquisition of Prestige Air Charter. Stanton chuckled and shrugged. To him, it was nothing more than a minor news blip. Some tech guy buying a charter company? Ordinary business. The world was full of billionaires trying to flaunt their status with a few private jets. But then he read further. A name appeared clearly. Alexander Cross. Stanton froze, his glass suspended mid-air. His heart slammed once in his chest. Memories of the morning surged back. The black man in seat 1A. Calm eyes, steady voice, refusing to give up his place. The man he had humiliated with a quiet whisper. I don't feel comfortable with him sitting up front. Stanton forced out a laugh, muttering to himself, Impossible. Just a common name. Cross is everywhere. But the more he scrolled, the more his smile died. An image filled the screen. Alexander Cross in a navy suit, signing the acquisition papers for Prestige Air, broadcast live on Bloomberg. There was no doubt. It was the same man he had dismissed. A chill raced down Stanton's spine. His phone rang. On the line was Eleanor Grant, the lawyer he relied on for complicated deals. Her voice was ice. Gregory, do you know Cross? Stanton scoffed, forcing calm. A tech guy. Met him this morning. Thought he was just some nobody passenger. Why? You've just crossed the most dangerous man you could imagine, Eleanor said, each word a blade. Cross doesn't take petty revenge. He destroys. Stanton slammed his glass down on the table, whiskey splashing. Destroy me? Don't be absurd. I've dealt with bigger men than him. Cross is just another tech dreamer. But then, an urgent email from his assistant popped up. Midwest Freight Solutions has cancelled their transport contract with Stanton Holdings, effective in 30 days. Stanton's eyes bulged. Midwest Freight was the lifeblood of his empire, the logistics chain moving assets from the factories he acquired. Without Midwest Freight, Stanton Holdings would choke, goods stuck in place, money frozen. He immediately called his operations chief. Get Hemlock on the phone right now. Midwest Freight can't cancel. They depend on us. The hesitant voice replied, Sir, the Hemlock family sold the company to Nexora Holdings 3 days ago. The phone slipped from Stanton's hand, landing on the thick carpet. His body went cold. Alexander Cross had not only bought Prestige Air, he had taken the backbone of Stanton's supply chain, a strike aimed straight at the heart. Gregory leapt to his feet, pacing the room like a trapped animal. He muttered, No, impossible. He couldn't have planned this so quickly. But deep inside he knew. Cross had not improvised. This was a calculated blow, waiting only for Stanton to step into it. Outside, Zurich glowed gold in the setting sun. Inside the hotel suite, Stanton saw the light as knives stabbing his eyes. He understood now. The game had changed. This was no longer about a first-class seat. It was a battle to the death between two empires, one built on manipulation, the other on the ability to see through every line of data. For the first time in years, Gregory Stanton tasted the raw flavor of fear. And that fear had a name: Alexander Cross. The next morning, Gregory Stanton woke with a heavy head and dark circles under his eyes after a sleepless night. He switched on the television, hoping the financial news might offer some comfort. Instead, the screen slammed him with a glaring red headline: Nexora Holdings acquires Midwest Freight, a lethal strike against Stanton Holdings. Stanton froze. The name Midwest Freight was no longer his backbone. It had become a weapon in the hands of his enemy. He hurled the remote and shouted, "Impossible! That was my lifeline!" Almost instantly, his phone rang non-stop. The first call came from his creditor bank. The credit manager's voice was deep and stripped of the usual courtesy. "Mr. Stanton, we have just reviewed the loan terms. The loss of Midwest Freight constitutes a material adverse event. Under contract, we are obligated to withdraw your credit facility immediately." Gregory broke into a cold sweat. Without liquidity, he could pay no salaries, sustain no deals in motion. Before he could hang up, another call cut in. A major investor bellowed into the phone. "Gregory, we poured hundreds of millions into your ventures. Now the market is screaming that Stanton Holdings is about to default. I'm pulling out. Effective immediately." The cold, flat dial tone followed, like a hammer striking a nail. On the streets, the market responded with ruthless clarity. Stanton Holdings' stock plummeted, red numbers bleeding across trading screens. Employees in the Chicago headquarters huddled together, their eyes fixed on the screens. One whispered, "Are we finished?" In the plush boardroom, senior executives shouted over one another. Some blamed the market, others cursed Midwest Freight. But none dared voice the truth. It all began on a flight to Zurich, with a man they had underestimated. Then came the third blow. That afternoon, the Wall Street Journal released an investigative feature. The Stanton Playbook: How a Mid-Tier Raider Profited from Destruction. The article exposed his ruthless tactics: buy a company, fire the workers, strip the assets, abandon communities. But the fatal blow was a leaked document. Proof that Stanton had siphoned tens of millions from a factory's pension fund for his own pocket. Outrage erupted. News channels splashed the story everywhere. Stanton's face filled screens under the headline, "The man who destroyed the retirement dreams of thousands of families." In a Detroit cafe, retired workers stared at the broadcast, their faces burning with anger. One slammed his fist on the table. "That's him! He stole everything from us!" Meanwhile, at Stanton Holdings headquarters, the phones rang without pause. But this time it was not customers calling. It was federal investigators. An email from the company's lawyer popped up on Stanton's screen. "The FBI has issued a search warrant. They will arrive at the office tomorrow morning." Gregory felt as though lightning had struck him. He collapsed into his chair, his mind reeling. It had all happened too fast. In just 48 hours, The empire he had spent decades building was collapsing like a sand castle under the tide. In Zurich, Alexander Cross sat quietly by the window of a conference room, his gaze fixed on the deep blue lake outside. Before him, the latest financial report glowed. Stanton Holdings, on the brink of bankruptcy, stock down 60% in 2 days. He did not smile, nor revel in triumph. His eyes carried only the calm of a man who knew he had planted a seed, and now that seed had grown into a storm. Alexander recalled the moment he was forced from seat 1A. That humiliation had now become a judgment spreading far wider, not only against Stanton, not only against the crew, but against the rotten system behind them. And in his heart, a single truth echoed. This is not revenge. This is balance. A bleak morning in Chicago. A cramped rental apartment with low ceilings and worn curtains. Gregory Stanton sat slumped in an old chair, his face gaunt, his disheveled silver hair hanging over hollow eyes. In front of him, a buzzing television broadcasted the financial news. No more walnut, paneled offices, no more $1,000 glasses of whiskey. No more Mr. Stanton spoken with reverence. Only a broken man in wrinkled clothes, drowning in his own bitterness. The screen shifted to a special program. Ascend Air. From scandal to the new global standard in aviation. A face appeared on screen. Alexander Cross, composed in a grey suit, seated before an international press corps. The studio lights reflected off him as if he were a beacon against the night. The host asked, "Mr. Cross, you transformed the entire culture of Ascend Air in just 6 months. What was your motivation?" Alexander looked directly into the camera, his eyes calm but commanding. "I believe the way a company treats its most vulnerable is the true measure of its value. There are no VIP seats in respect. Every person deserves to be treated fairly." The answer echoed through the small apartment, crashing into Stanton's ears like a personal indictment. He remembered that moment on the plane, the smug smile, the whispered words he thought were enough to belittle another man. On screen, Alexander continued, "We established the Ascend Academy, training a new generation of pilots, attendants, and engineers who are not only skilled, but also ethically responsible. We created the Ascend Foundation, investing in scholarships for women and minorities in aviation. This is not just business. This is responsibility." Applause thundered through the studio. Stanton stared, his chest tightening, his heart aching as he watched the world celebrate the very man he had once dismissed. The phone on the table vibrated with a news alert. Gregory Stanton officially sentenced to 10 years in prison for fraud and embezzlement of pension funds. His trembling fingers tapped the screen. His name was no longer tied to power, but to crime. He dropped the phone, burying his head in his hands. A single haunting question echoed in his mind. When did I lose? He knew the answer. The very moment he whispered to Linda Parker on that flight, "I don't feel comfortable with him sitting up front." That moment had lit the fuse of his own destruction. On the television, Alexander Cross closed the press conference with a warm, steady voice. "This is not revenge. This is consequence. And consequence always arrives when you choose to diminish others." Stanton switched off the TV. The room sank into silence. He sat hunched in the shadows, swallowed by darkness. An empire fallen. A man who once thought himself untouchable now reduced to a forgotten figure. Outside, the sky opened for a new era, an era where the name Alexander Cross stood as a symbol not only of power, but of justice. In a world where power is so often abused, the story of Alexander Cross reminds us of a simple truth. Justice does not always come with the strike of a gavel in a courtroom. Sometimes it arrives in the sky, in the middle of a flight that seemed ordinary. A single whisper laced with prejudice can trigger a domino effect strong enough to bring down an entire empire. If you believe that respect should never have classes or tiers, hit like to help this story reach farther. If you want to continue following stories of justice and resilience, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. And finally, leave a comment with just 2 words, no excuses, to declare that in this world, no excuse can ever hide discrimination.